thank you for having an interest in my perspective on the Portland's waterfront. So we're going to have to jump right into this because I found out this was a big topic and it's long. So if you excuse me, we'll just jump right into it. This is the Ocean Passages for the World, and it shows a little red line of the trip that we took. But I had the opportunity to look at everybody else's port before I came back home. So I had some perspective on what was going on. I just only could think of the end of The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy tapped her heels together and said, "There's no place like home." And that's how I felt when I came back into Portland. You know, it's my great-grandfather, I bless him every day. He left to his family reams of advice on how to behave yourself and brush your teeth, but this is a particularly interesting thing he said, is to have a vision and proceed on that vision. And you know, it's great to have advice, and you can talk about it, but how do you do it, right? My grandfather understood the advice, but he had sometimes a hard time doing it. And it's when I got back from sailing around the world, you know, I was really basically faced with, what do I do with my life? And I found this quote, and it says, "A good rower sets his course in relationship to objects he is leaving behind." And oh, sure, there's an occasional glance over the shoulder, but the real work is done backwards. And the only way for the rower to get to where he is going is to face squarely where he's been and proceed as best he can. There's a good deal of loose talk about facing the future, and it's all very inspirational as long as we realize that anatomically and metaphysically it can't be done. Like the rower, we face the past and back into the future. To me, that was a really important thing to understand, because as a navigator, the vision of getting into Tahiti is executed by constantly determining where the ship is and then resetting the ideal course from the present position to the destination, given all of the variables that you just learned about. You say, "I would like to go there," but by God, you never actually get to that place. But you learn that there's a difference between where you were and where you'd like to be, so you make an adjustment, and you can do that as rapidly as possible. You end up at the right place that way. There's some important people that say something, and so I've accumulated some philosophical lenses. These color the arguments I have with myself when I'm searching for the best decision I can make. Vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. George Bernard Shaw said, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world, and the unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person." And then C.A. Marshall wrote an incredible book on seaworthiness. And it turns out he was quite a philosopher, studying surreptitiously under the German occupation. But he said the very essence of human predicament is the split between reason and belief. The first is controlled by the rational mind. The second is governed by emotions and ideologies. I think you have to be very careful when you're trying to find the best course. You're going to get trapped by an ideology. Then Charles W. Eliot was one of the most important presidents of Harvard, and he changed the educational system that we have today. And so that's a picture of him with his grandson. And you can thank him for the educational system that they have today at most colleges. And in sailing around the world, you get a chance to look at everybody else's country. And you don't know a country until you look for a fan belt. And it became really obvious that the most basic decisions about how human beings will live are largely made by and through the economic system. And the Caribbean is a wonderful place to go look at different economic systems working in essentially the same island. And you can see from 30,000 square feet the difference between Haiti and the Dominican Republic in this picture. The fundamental responsibility of good government is to put policies in place that will result in a wealthy government and a wealthy population. Because the source for funding for the government programs is ultimately the productivity of the citizens. And there's no better place to look at the failure of government than Haiti. If we did not have a successful and wealthy country, we would not have been able to win World War II, and we would have all been speaking German here. So it's a really important thing to understand that the interaction of the government with the economic system is probably at the base of our success. Each of us in this room has his own zenith point, perspective. My perspective is simply the sum of my experiences and training. The sea is a harsh teacher. It's always throwing little quizzes at you to see if you can fail. The consequences of failure is the higher level quiz and a significant examination. And until you either find a way to get a passing grade or your life may be forfeit. So a navigator is trained to think about where he is on the globe in relationship with the point of the Earth on the celestial sphere that's defined by the center of the Earth and the navigator's ground position. Each of us here in this room have our own zenith point. That is your own experience. That's where you are. I can't share that with you, but I will share my zenith point with you tonight. Navigators get hung up when they decide they're right and stop trying to look for evidence that their assumptions are wrong. People here probably know about the Honda Point tragedy, where 7 military vessels ended up on the reef because they followed the first one they went with the flow, let's put it that way. The navigator takes every input he can glean and charts the course, knowing full well that the course is wrong. And the boat is not going to get to that predicted point. So a navigator is constantly examining every input as a check against his assumption. Every moment new information may appear, indicating where he actually is compared to his prediction. The navigator is constantly vigilant and prepared to correct the course. If I wish to make the best decision, then I have to presume I'm wrong and be always prepared to adjust it. The motivation is the fear of missing the small clue to a huge mistake. This is the worst peacetime naval disaster in the history of the Navy. The lead ship navigators made an error, 20 knots in a pea soup fog. They turned too quickly. 6 others followed them in, and it was a mistake of significant proportion. We're all on our own path. We're all living our lives. We're all navigators of our own lives. And we have to keep our antennas up. This is a map of the world, and people are used to these kind of maps. This is a problem when you try to get a sphere projected onto a flat surface. And this is tangent maybe at 20 degrees north latitude. You can see Antarctica is definitely not that big. But as you look at these maps, it works your perspective. And I think it's important to see that. There's a subtle propaganda in choosing the point of tangency on a world chart. This is the New York frame of mind. You can see that there is a map point for New York. The dotted line is actually the straightest path between the 2 points. And you can see the distortion on that map. How many people in this room realize if we go due east from here, we'll run into Nova Scotia? Right? It's 6 miles south of where we're sitting right now. Have you seen a map that really transmits that information to you? As a navigator, you have to know that the maps lie. You know, that there's different projections about them. So the first point that I want to make is this is where I am tonight. Right? This is my zenith point. And it's where we're going to start out from. Google Earth, its perspective is compared to the Mercator projection. If you want to go from New York to the English Channel, and you're going in a straight line, you go right over Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. People aren't aware of that because you saw that other map up there, and how could you figure that out from that map? Here we are centered on Portland, Maine. The yellow line is takes you to the point where the Titanic sank, and it shows you the Great Circle route that would take you into Portland. It shows you the Bermuda. God put Bermuda right dead in the center. And if you look at that picture, basically the distances are within 100 miles to all of those locations. And so leaving from Portland to go to Bermuda, you're not significantly penalized for living in Portland. In fact, because of the way the winds blow, you have to go to this point, you see the little line out there, way out to windward before you turn south to get to the Caribbean, because of if you got into a southeasterly, you'd be beating. So Portland has always enjoyed a really important place in terms of the logistics of sailing. Bermuda is our closest ally in the trip to the south, and it's a place where sailors have historically ducked in because of the weather. The other thing that's really important is to take another view of the world, which is the polar view, and realize that the Europeans were trying to get early on to China, to Japan. And you can understand now why they were looking for the Northwest Passage. It's a hell of a trip to go through the Panama Canal and around across the Pacific if you could just get over the top. And they tried hard. This is the globe centered on the English Channel. Clearly, if you're coming out and you wanted to go to the rest of the United States, this is the route. And that's why everybody showed up here pretty early. I'm going to zap forward to today. And this is centered on Norway. There's $390 million worth of frozen fish that comes into the United States through Norway. $90 million worth of frozen fish that comes through Iceland. Again, from a sailor's perspective, it makes perfect sense to head away from where you're going for a while to actually get to where you want to go. And you can see the routes in the North Atlantic. Again, these are the routes in the Caribbean. And the little red line is sort of the trip that you would take if you were going from Portland, Maine to Antigua. It's 726 miles to Bermuda from Portland and 966 miles to Antigua. Takes about 2 weeks, and a decent-sized trading vessel from Portland, Maine is not at all disadvantaged for any boat that was coming from the rest of the United States simply because of the direction of the wind. So our relationship with the Caribbean has been strong. Again, the settlement of Acadia was basically because the explorers were looking for the Northwest Passage. They were coming in here, noticing the great resources, and Portland Harbor was early on spotted as an important harbor. The reason why we have such an incredible fishery here is because of the cold water that comes into the Gulf of Maine, and because of the glacial moraine that blocked and caused that inner sea. Incredible resource. We have to understand what our advantages are. 90% of the Maine land is covered by valuable forests. These are the assets that, but how these assets are perceived depends on one's perspective. As a geologist, I used to make maps. And I learned that the people who make the maps present the perspective of those maps. And maps are only there to give you an idea of what the world looks like. We should also understand that there's absolutely no economic reason why we should be paying $4 per gallon for fuel, and people should be suffering. There have been and will be political choices, but if the information on of the map maker removes the information, how can we as the public make informed choices? This picture on this side comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it shows you, as a geologist, all the basins where we find oil and gas in the United States. If you look on the East Coast, they have removed all of the Mississippi oil basins that come right up the East Coast of the United States. And if you look at the other set of maps, you know that the Beaufort Sea in Alaska is one of the areas that produces an incredible amount of gas, an incredible amount of oil. Well, that's 27, I think it's tetra cubic feet of gas, and right off Maine and New England is 37. That has been basically removed from the maps. So it's really important that we understand that the people that make the maps decide what information we're getting. So I've set the stage for a logical position, a logistical position, a brief discussion of the natural resources. The next 3 slides basically offer you the opportunity to be sensitive to the evolution of technology. If technology played havoc with the best led plans that are not robust enough to only consider the basic logistical and resource trends, I think up until now we've been preparing, and I call it, for the road through time. We're going to rush through, hurdle almost 400 years of Portland history. Barely enough to take a peek, and I can't even read every date on the slide. So I'm going to concentrate hopefully on a few dates as we go through. I'm going to stop every once in a while and sort of take a rest on my words. This period is less than 8 lifetimes. Portland's had its highs and its lows, and taking Portland and Maine's great historical strengths as a fixed value, we can almost offer a mathematical formula of economic success based on a function of political will, world events, technological changes, enthusiasm for risk, and plain luck. So keep an eye open for the signs of the coming changes. There's 6 economic periods. There's the pre-Civil War, post-Civil War, railroad period, urban harbor malaise, urban demolition period, urban development period, and then a modern urbanism is what we're starting to come into right now. There were 40 reports and no action during the time of harbor malaise. The city abandoned the urban demolition approach and adopted an urban renewal approach. Through hard work and evolution of visions, the city established a strong land-based economy. At the same time, it is a visceral commitment to preserving the working waterfront. Until modern urbanism, it was politically necessary but economically unworkable policies have really kept the historic waterfront from evolving in a sympathetic manner with the uplands. We have a city which is fiercely interested in, but no longer has direct economic dependency upon the few businesses directly related to the harbor commerce. We have marine-related businesses that are in the sunset of their viability and are weak financially, yet are faced with high maintenance costs and crushing regulatory hurdles. We're about to whisk through about 400 years of events and that created the fabric of Portland's present existence. I had to cut mercilessly because of the press of time. I think that the process of rapid adaptation, growth, retention of legacy structures and infrastructures is important to see as we work through this. Basically, we start with the wooden shipbuilding, the Industrial Revolution, where the water power became important, supplanted by steam power, which meant you could bring the steam engine to your material rather than material to the waterfall. Then the boats, trains, and modern manufacturing. So in these events that we're looking at here in the dates, you'll be able to see the fabric of what's going on during that period. I want to start with George Weymouth. George Weymouth captured Squanto and 5 Patuxet Indians, which led to 174 years of bad feelings between the natives and the people that lived in Maine. Squanto, as you know, helped the Pilgrims, was important. He took 6 trips across the Atlantic, but we had a big problem that started out with that in Maine. And then Christopher Leavitt was one of the first people to set foot in Portland, Maine. And he said, all broken islands in the sea, which makes many excellent good harbors where 1,000 sails of ship may ride safely. So our bays, large sheltered anchorages, and exceptional deep channel have shaped our history. This is a map of all the recorded hurricanes. And Christopher Leavitt was pretty smart. You look at this, I reduced this to the hurricanes that actually came within 75 miles of Portland. Portland's a great harbor because it's a hurricane hole. If you look at these tracks, you realize that it is really bad to be in Connecticut. Portland has never had a hurricane with more than 89 knots of wind and a 4.5-foot surge. So if you've got a boat in Connecticut, you ought to beat feet to Maine when the hurricanes are coming. You should also come to Portland instead of farther down east, because in Portland you're farther away from the center of the hurricane and there's significantly less wind. So we have an incredible harbor. Newport will have had 120 knots in Hurricane Bob and a 12-foot storm surge. The boats were on the lawn at Tabor. In Portland, Maine, I was on the Nantucket Lightship as hurricane skipper and didn't even rattle the chain. George Cleves, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your relatives. This is an inside joke. Come on, Herb. Albert Weeks was a Brit. Here is his payroll for when he was working for Winters on Richmond Island. He deposited George Cleves here in Portland. And so enough of that. I got my 2 bits in. This is a fort. This is how people lived here while the Indians were unhappy with us. Pretty miserable place. And thanks to James Finney Baxter, we really understand what it was like to live on Richmond Island and the fishing community, and also a lot about George Cleves, because he found a whole bunch of information on him. In 1690, they wiped people out of Maine. They were gone. Unhappy Indians. 26 Jordans died right near where my house is in Cape Elizabeth during the King Philip's War. So it was not a good time for Maine. Important date is when Pepperell went to capture Fort Louisburg. The British wouldn't protect the Americans. They told all of us we had to carry guns. And by God, they went up, they captured the fort and realized that they could face down a colonial power. In 1774, Mowat was captured in Portland, and he came back and burnt the town back down the next year. Now we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, where it started. Now, this picture shows you, again, it's a New York train of mine, but it shows you how long it takes to travel that distance in 1800. And what you have to realize is that we're at the brink of a major transportation breakthrough. Cape Elizabeth with the fog was a great place for growing lettuce. One of the best places on the East Coast for lettuce. You couldn't send that very far. Your markets were small. It's perishable, hard to ship. In 1807, we were working up to the War of 1812, and they built these forts here to keep us in instead of the British out, because we were smuggling. We weren't very happy about the War of 1812. The Boxer and the Enterprise. I remember the sea fight far away, how it thundered over the tide, and the dead captains as they lay in their graves overtook the tranquil bay, where they in battle died. And the sound of that mournful song goes through me with a thrill. A boy's will is the wind's will, and the thoughts of youth are long thoughts, long, long thoughts. The War of 1812 is not popular. The captain of the Bounty, of the Boxer, had in his pocket a money that he was paid to escort the smuggling ship through the British lines into Maine. And people of Portland made sure that the funds were received by his widow and children. First textile mill, in 1831, we had a headless storm in Portland. Really damaged the harbor. And a guy named Lieutenant Poole from the artillery, U.S. Army Artillery, before the Army Corps, designed 2 breakwaters for Portland Harbor. One of them is now Bug Light, and the other one was never built. It was off the eastern end. And living up there with Portland Yacht Services, I wish the hell they built them. I think we really missed something. But we get into the first locomotives, and then the Cumberland-Oxford Canal. You have to realize that it took about 4 to 5 cords of wood to heat a house every day, every winter. We had denuded all the trees. And the Cumberland-Oxford Canal was a way to get that material down here to Portland. Really important part. The only problem was that it was built just before the railroads came, and the railroads were more efficient. 1837 was a significant financial bubble burst. It was related to speculation in northern Maine woods. Major banks failed because they created a bubble that was not sustainable in value for the northern Maine woods. Interesting. Reads very similar. The development of rail. What are we doing? The development of rail transportation marks the beginning of the second industrial revolution and transformed the economy of Maine. Businesses no longer were constrained by the high cost of transportation, and accessible markets eventually stretched across the country. If the business was building something, it was still constrained by the lack of interchangeability of parts. Each part had to be made to fit the piece. but the products from farms could be shipped in ice. Transportation was slow, arduous, and still violent, but you can see how the reach has really changed. By 1830, this is the Grand Trunk down on the end of Commercial Street. And really important to realize that now, if you were building something in Portland, Maine, you could ship it a long distance, and your market increased significantly. Portland's population at the time that John Poor was trying to get the railway to Montreal, was about 16,000 people. Not very big. But the Portland Company was started in 1846. Union Mutual started. They were the first ones that did that reinsurance. The Atlantic and St. Lawrence started up towards Montreal, and the Grand Trunk finally opened up in 1853. S.D. Warren showed up in Westbrook. The dream of John Poor was to connect Europe with the west coast of the United States and Japan. A land bridge hooked up through the Canadian railroad system, across to Vancouver, and back on boats again to get into Japan. Because remember, we looked at the world, and that is a shortcut. So this man recognized this and spent 30 years of his life putting this together. And as you can see, the rate of travel has really improved again. You can get to almost Texas in a week. I just had to put one of the Maine Historical Society pictures on the screen. That was done by Longfellow's sister, I think. The Great Eastern, one of the major technological marvels of the time, was built to come into Portland as part of John Poor's dream. They spent $200,000 building a pier right next to where the Portland Company is under the Eastern Prom to receive that vessel. Never came here. The dry dock that was over underneath the old Casco Bay Bridge, you can look down into it, was built for that ship. The world changed really quickly when the Monitor took on the Merrimack. This is the Mobile Bay battle. And right there is the Agawam that was built in 1863 by the Portland Company. And you can see how quickly the ships changed their configuration when it became clear that the wooden war vessels were a thing of the past. Right now, we're talking about something that was allowed us to move into the next phase, the inventing phase of the Industrial Revolution, and that was the Siemens Martin open hearth furnace. Incredibly important moment in the Industrial Revolution. And the reason why was that you had the Bloom furnace, which created basically a lump that you had to beat all the slag out of. The Bessemer furnace, you put the molten iron in it and blew air through it, which removed in 30 minutes removed all of the carbon, and it was really uncontrollable. And then finally, the Siemens Martin allowed this vat of molten steel to be sitting there, and you could add things to it and sample it so that you could create hard steel, soft steel, clock, things that you could use for clock springs, tools, skyscrapers, bridges, locomotives. Basically, they suddenly began to be able to create variable qualities of steel. Carnegie is the one that basically figured this out. He put it into production. Before he did this, a railroad track made of cast steel would last 3 years. You'd be able to probably put a 4 to 8 ton railroad car on it. With the Bessemer steel process and the Siemens Martin, they would last 10 to 12 years, and you could put an 85 ton car on it. major improvement in our ability to manufacture new things because of Portland fire. Started in a boathouse and raced across the city to Munjoyville. Now that is Zappatic Restaurant. Right there. That building is still here. And remember, they didn't want it torn down, and there was a reason, because it's one of the buildings that survived the fire. You know, this is John Poor, and we're walking the streets of Portland, and what this man did really has formed Portland as we know it today. And there are few people that have really made as big a change to the city as John Poor. And I know a little bit about him because of the Portland Company, and I've read the director's books of both the Portland Company and the Atlantic and St. Lawrence. So he's someone that's absolutely fascinated me. And in 1871, he passed away just a week before his great vision of the Intercontinental Railroad came together. It was horrible. And, you know, but he brought in the Lawrence and St. Lawrence Railroad. He brought in the which became the Grand Trunk. He created Commercial Street. He did Marginal Way. He brought Portland out of the recession of 1837. He did the gas works where I'm now involved in the land down there. And the Portland Company, he did the Rochester Railroad that went to New York. His brother started the financial Standard & Poor's from a railroad perspective. He did a hydrological study of the state of Maine looking for water resources, for dams, for creating mills. You know, this was a man that his vision was to connect Europe with the Far East through Portland, Maine. And today, we're standing here with his legacy infrastructure that he put here. Still using it. And it's pretty amazing that somebody like this could make such a big impact on us. And here you can see a map, which is basically shows Portland, Maine, the connection to Chicago through the Grand Trunk Railroad. It's pretty amazing what this man was able to accomplish. But I hate to impose my zenith point on New York, but I'm here in Portland, Maine, and I don't exactly see the world from a New York frame of mind. Where is that railroad that Poor put in? It's still there, but whoever made this map doesn't think it's important enough to put on the map. We have to protect our point of view in the world. Otherwise, New York, Montreal, Toronto will decide what everybody sees. Here's another one, Class I Railroads of North America. Geez, I don't see any of the railroads in Maine. I don't see the connection. So if you're looking in a book and trying to figure out how you're going to shift something around, I guess you're not going to know that there's anything here. So now we're working our way up until World War II. Hannaford Brothers, Nichols, L.L. Beans. Cape Cod Canal was dug, but it wasn't taken over. It was taken over by the government after a U-boat shelled the tugboat off Orleans. Federal income tax, the last Portland Company Railroad. Icelandic Ship Corporation is formed. The $1 million bridge replaces Elias Thomas's toll bridge. Now, if you look at the Panama Canal, you can see the Panama Canal Max vessel, the top one, it's 950 feet long. Well, the new Panama Canal Max vessel is going to be much bigger than that. This will hold 12,000 20-foot container units of containers. If you took them off the ship and put them on the ground, that's 44 acres. If you lined them up, it would be 45 miles long. It's going to be a heck of a mess getting the ports to be able to take that kind of vessel. Interesting. There's an opportunity for me. So it takes us up to basically James Finney Baxter's vision for Portland. Another person that had his zenith on Portland, who had a vision for Portland. So he put in the Deering Oaks Parks, the Western Promenade, and the Eastern Prom. He also was Baxter State Park. He was the governor of the state, a really important person for Portland, who we are still and should every day be grateful for. The Jones Act in 1920 was set up to protect the shipping industry. If you're building weird vessels like notchbacks to avoid the rules, I don't think it really works. They suspended it for a number of times because there aren't any American vessels left. But Will Frost, Beals Island, first modern lobster boat, not very long ago. The last engineless schooner, the first entirely welded ship. Death to Portland's connection with the Grand Trunk was the bankruptcy of the Grand Trunk when it was taken into the Canadian National System. Now Toronto was deciding which ports they were going to promote. Instead of Portland, Maine, it was Toronto's perspective, and they decided that they were going to do St. John's and Halifax. So we lost control of that. So in 1924, we built the Maine State Pier. It was open for business. One of the most remarkable years for the Maine State Pier was 1927. A 47% increase in freight that went to the West Coast, a 42% increase in freight that went from the West Coast through Maine to Europe. We had ships coming every 2 weeks from England. We had ships coming every 2 weeks from Germany and Brest. We had coastwise shipping coming up to Portland, and we were looking for ways to get to South America and have connections to South America through the maps I was showing you, how we were advantaged by that because these were low power ships. But you can also see what's happened to the rates of travel. Pretty incredible. But what happens if you were an Idaho potato farmer and you were shipping stuff back to Maine? How's the guy in the Rocky Farm in Maine going to do against an Idaho potato farmer? How's the guy what are you going to do about the Napa Valley? So these things were rapidly changing the economics of the state of Maine. In 1933, we had a national bank holiday. I have to get my 2 bits in. My grandfather got in his Model T, who was president of the Canal Bank, drove down to the Federal Reserve in Boston, brought $1 million back in the back seat, and refused to close the Canal Bank when he was ordered directly to do it. There were only 4 banks survived that in Maine. It was quite a deal. With this new material, with all of this stuff that was going on, they were starting to invent things. They invented the refrigerator. They were now able to put that produce in a truck and drive it, put it in the train and drive it. And now refrigerated means that your markets were huge. significantly changed the perspective on how merchandise was created during that time. Then we got into the Todd Bath Iron Works shipyards in Portland. The Navy's perspective was, what is the best harbor that we can use for the North Atlantic Fleet? They chose Portland for making those up. 1944, the Wind-class icebreaker really allowed the St. Lawrence Seaway to be open, again diminishing Portland's importance to the western and eastern part of Canada. Lorraine A was installed. But I really like this. I have a Farmall A, and I like the fact that in 1945, which to me, a couple of years before I was born, that just at that point there were more tractors than horses on the farms. Lorraine A was started in the Aleutians, and fishing became a lot more efficient with the introduction of the side trawlers. There's a picture of the Reuben James and the Wind-class icebreaker. So here we are. This is a drawing of the truck routes. Do you see my point again? Who drew this map? Are we on the pointy end of the dog, or are we on the tail end of the dog? After World War II, basically the trucks took over from the trains. How did they do that? During World War II, the engines were improved significantly. Ice and trailers were created, and the road system was put in place. Those three elements needed to happen. So here we are again. I don't see that linkage, right? Who drew this map? We're getting now into the transistor, a major change in the way things work on the water as well as on land. Computers, hurricane just really damages Portland in '54. The Federal Highway Act opens up Route 1. A friend of mine, Jack Jensen, starts Cal Boats in California. The St. Lawrence Seaway opens. You know, Portland's connection to Canada has been severed by political decisions in Toronto. 1960, Yankee Row, the first atomic plant, commercial atomic plant in New England, was built at the Portland Company. Irving put their refinery in New Brunswick. We're starting to get chemicals created. The Goujon brothers created the first epoxy boats. We lost the pig farm. And as a child, I remember holding my breath for the whole time by the pig farm. Fort Williams was closed, so we lost the military connections to our economy. And then Sealand put the first container ship from Port Elizabeth to Rotterdam. The end of break bulk. Shipping never recovered from that. We had an incredible person come to Portland, a native of Portland, John Minerio. He became city manager. The time he came here, it was slum removal. It was urban development with bulldozing. We had 2 open dumps. The sewer, no sewer treatment. We were dumping 16 million gallons a day into Back Bay. There were no major highways. The Franklin Street and Spring Street didn't exist. Washington Avenue and Danforth Streets were the only way to get into Portland. And it was through horrible slums. Portland was in devastating financial shape. 85%, 85% of the buildings in the old port were vacant. Operation Junk Car removed 3,000 junk cars from backyards and streets of Portland. Casco Bay Bank, Canal Bank, Porches, Benoit's, they're all gone now. But these were the locally owned businesses that provided the leadership with John Minerio to get Portland coming back. Jane Jacobs wrote a really important book around 1961. It's called The Death and Life of the Great American Cities. I bring it to your attention, and we really should, everybody should read it, because she makes the points that we forgot about what cities are all about. Don't have time to go any farther than that. The Graduate, one word, plastics. Everybody remembers the movie. In 1970, John Minerio and Clark Neely used the Jones Act to recognize that the connection between Portland and Yarmouth, Nova Scotia would allow a foreign vessel to operate on that route. They pulled a coup. They brought the ship in. The Canal Bank building. Halsey Smith was a visionary. And the Casco Bank decided to build a building. All the other banks in Portland decided they needed to build a building too. So the Casco Bank started it. The Canal Bank bought 3 or 4 whole city blocks in the Old Port in order to remove a street, and then sold those buildings back to developers who then could start the revolution of and the evolution of the Old Port area in Portland. Really important time. And my friend Roger Houston started Sabre Yachts at the time. So we're now getting into these, let's see how we're doing. We're doing really badly. Okay. The first Irving oil refinery. Again, we have this major, that was their expansion. The sardine industry. There were 20 sardine companies in Maine at the time. And they said, if you allow these Russians to go out there and these Germans off our coast and catch all the sardines that have the roe in them, we will not be here. And everybody said, well, nobody's eating sardines anymore. I sailed my boat into Portland for the first time. I had to put plywood down on the pier where DeMillis is now. And I sailed across on the first 6th of January to tie up on this pier and ran into 6.5 feet of water where it said 28 feet of water. And I looked up, and there was the open sewer for the city of Portland, dumping it directly into that. And so there was 22 feet of raw in the water there. The Portland was in a devastating condition. In 1977, Washburn and Doughty started building metal ships, steel fishing boats. The National Science Foundation described Portland's waterfront as the most dilapidated on the East Coast. VisiCount came out, paid for itself entirely in 2 weeks. Pretty incredible. 3 Mile Island ended the medium to heavy manufacturing in New England, in the United States. Maine Times pointed out the uphill struggle with small businesses such as J.J. Nissen against mass distribution and automation. That Russian and East German factory ships started to appear in our harbors. Casco Bay Lines was taken over from bankruptcy. Peacock Cannery closed. Merrill Industry opened. In '87, they were the largest volume in the state. The American Cities Corporation came here in 1982 and predicted what we're doing right now. Predicted what we're doing, but we didn't like that, and we decided to do something else for a long time. One of the complaints was that it sounded too much like Faneuil Hall in Boston. Oh my. 16 million people show up there, and it's the center, right now it's the center of all of the activity in that part of Boston. DIW Dry Dock came in here through the efforts of George Campbell. Canal Bank merges into Key Bank and disappears into that huge infrastructure. The Russian factory ships anchored in Penobscot Bay, and the process was described as a huge success. In 1985, Microsoft Windows was introduced. I'm way apologize to everybody. In 1987, the sardine factories preferred to pack 3-year-old sardines, the fish and trap by closing off coves. No fish have shown up for 5 or 6 years. 89 was a great codfish year. We didn't do anything about it. We had the 10% luxury taxes on the boats. We lost 35% of our boat builders. NAFTA was taken off, removed the penalties on Irving Oil, bringing their refined products into the state of Maine. J.J. Nissen was sold to Betty Noyes. Casco Northern was merged out of existence. GPS becomes operational, and the internet restrictions were removed. That's only 1995, so it's just yesterday. General Dynamics bought Bath. Governor King got in a hell of a mess over the sardines. The Sustainable Fisheries Act said, by law, we're going to put all of these fisheries back into great shape by 2014. How's that grab you? Destroyed, we ruined it over 350 years, and we're going to bring it back in 10 years. J.J. Nissen moved out of Portland. Irving was now the largest landowner in the state of Maine. The master plan came out for the development of the eastern waterfront, and it was pretty clear Portland Yacht Services had to move. Gulf of Maine Research Institute opens. Vision. A vision. There was one sardine factory left in the state of Maine in Gouldsboro. The World is Flat by Friedman came out, where we're talking about the relationships between, the new relationships between minds in the world through the internet and the new economy of the world. Bumblebee completed a $12 million expansion at the Prospect Harbor sardine facility. The sulfur carrier. The Fast Cat came in. September 8th, they deactivated the U.S. air station in Iceland. That was an opportunity for us. But why, look at the map, why in the world Iceland? That's the map. That's why. But it also meant that the Icelandic carrier didn't need to go into Virginia anymore. So they were looking for a new home. Olympia Companies gets the nod from the City Council to the Maine State Pier. The Bay Ferries Cat realizes that they can't afford $4 a gallon for gasoline. They're all done. Imeskip reorganizes after a significant investment from American firm Yokipa, $2 billion. $2 billion. The last Maine sardine cannery closes. They disassemble all the new equipment and take it up to Canada. We've learned that the rebuilding of the cod population in the Gulf of Maine is constrained by the availability of bait fish. That in fact, cod followed the herring into the rivers and the coves, and until the 3-year-old herring are back in the coves, I don't think anyone has a right to declare any victories. Portland Pipeline cargoes qualify Portland Harbor for maintenance dredging. If we don't dredge the harbors, we can't bring big vessels into Portland. So our way of life depends on the cargo that is moved over the pipeline. 60% of our oil now comes from Canada, and the cargo is no longer moving from the pipeline into Canada, but it's moving by rail now into the Irving refinery in St. John, which is the largest refinery in North America. And then it comes back down to us, and we pay for it. So in October 2012, the possibility came that IMSCIP wanted to come to Portland. And in 2013, they selected Portland. And this is IMSCIP's roots. And because of what we talked about before, you can see that somebody at Yopipa has got an overview of the world. And that view looks very much like the Google plan that we put up here before, the early part of the talk. Here's our Portland Company property was sold. The pipeline is under attack. The federal channel dredging is going on in Portland Harbor right now, but there's no way that the harbor can dredge between the piers because of the regulations. Right? Oakhurst Milk was sold. The International Marine Terminal is going to expand. So we're into my conclusion now, a little bit late, I apologize. You can't take away Portland's real logistical strengths except by allowing someone else out of the Portland perspective to write us out. We're not taking care of the legacy infrastructure that we have. We need to join the Unreasonable Persons Club. It's an essential component of affecting the future, but it's necessary to choose the vision carefully and avoid the trap of ideologies. Awareness of the whole picture and being willing to come into conflict with other competitors. The best laid plans are subject to buffeting from forces which are completely out of our local control. The destination is controllable by making course changes. But we're always looking for new information. A relatively small number of people spot the problem. So no one should listen, so everybody should listen carefully to someone who has a different minority opinion. A robust future depends on local people with vision and understanding of strengths within the community that perceive and are willing to take the risk to pursue the opportunities. These are the risk takers. They're very few. Reasonable people are often dangerous because they are risk averse and oppose their perspective of conforming to existing conditions on the dreamers who shake up their reality. We need to have a statistically significant number of individuals who are pursuing a vision, and a system that encourages risk-taking and easy unwinding of ideas that don't work. And we have to remember that the government has a responsibility to establish the economic playing field and to enable the motivation for the creation of wealth, which is a source of the income that the government uses for its social programs. And we should expect this standard. So a harbor can't be vibrant unless it has a way to service its vessels. And Portland Yacht Services has taken 30 years to grow itself, but is but a recycling of a previous concept. One has to ask if what IMSCIP offers is not clearly ingrained in our history, and it's now the opportunity to recapture and repackage the aging infrastructure of John Ford's vision. And I want to leave you all with the thought that it is up to us to protect our economy through constant vigilance, reason, and unreasonable actions. And if we don't, there are more than enough great competitors that will thank us. Thank you very much.
Couldn't do it. Awesome. Couldn't do it.
Phineas, Finn, thank you very much. what everybody has to approve. We like to run a tight ship here at GMRI, and so does Finn. But this was an extraordinary compilation of the history of this harbor. I don't think it's ever been done before. So we decided we're going to let it run a little late because nobody was squirming too much. So I'd like to invite anybody, if you have to go and what have you, please feel free. And although Finn was pretty exhaustive, some of you might have a question or two.
Well, my life is like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I had the whole thing tied up in a bow, and on comes Imskip. And this is a really important thing for Maine, and I went to Iceland with Dave Fink from the railroad, and he and I cooked up a deal on the way over that I'd move my boatyard. So I pitched Imskip to come to Portland. David said that if I didn't want to do it, he would go. And so I knew what a big deal this was, Portland, because I understand the history of Portland and this linkage, how important it is. And I'm thrilled to see them here. This has been a painful, miserable experience because I have to move the boatyard to lesser land to the west. And I have to go through the whole permitting process all over again. And it's taken me a year more to do it than I'd anticipated. But it's up to us to make sure that these guys are successful and that we really make sure that the Portland perspective is strong and that we insist on those linkages to come up on the map. Or no? Yeah? You know something? I'm not going to worry about it because this is too big a deal to not have them issued. And the governor actually has made promises to these guys, so he's going to have to work his way out of his own problem. It'll get funded. Either that or we'll all march up there and make sure it does.
Weird.
Yeah. I think that the whole harbor would be different because it was Lieutenant Poole, and he did that in 1833, that plan, and they did bug light with it, and they had all of the granite all ready to go from House Island to do the breakwater, but they never did it. But it would have changed the whole complexion of the harbor in terms of protection from storms. It was a 7-mile fetch. It's a really good idea. It just never happened.